I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Forgotten Oscar Films. And this week, we're going to be looking at the 2007 Academy Awards, looking at the film Michael Clayton, trying to understand my thoughts on the movie and why it has been forgotten and less remembered over the years, and what I think is actually a very underrated movie. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about a movie that was nominated for Best Picture that I think has been forgotten to time. One that is maybe underrated, one that hasn't been seen by many people, or just hasn't been as widely celebrated in the pop culture consciousness. Now, the show is structured in three parts. At first, I give my thoughts in terms of the historical context, just to give us an understanding as to where we were at the time and a little bit of an Oscar history and ultimately why I picked the movie. Then I give my thoughts on the movie. Most of the time, I'm seeing these movies for the first time or have only seen them, once a few years ago. So it's a sort of a recollection of my thoughts. And then finally, the final part is just trying to answer that central question as to why this movie has been forgotten, why this has sort of fallen out of the popular consciousness. Where it was very popular at the time, it was one of the best Picture nominees, but maybe has fallen out of popular favor. And really this year of 2007 was a great year, I think, for video games, I think for music, and also for movies. So because I think 2007 was such a great year for movies, it was reflected in that of the Oscars, where I think that 2007 Oscars were pretty great. And if you look at a lot of the winners, you don't really have too many quarrels with them. The Best Picture winner went to No Country for Old Men, which in my opinion may be the best 2000s Best Picture winner, up there with Lord of the Rings. Daniel Day-Lewis delivered one of the greatest performances of all time in There Will Be Blood, and deservingly won that. And then Javier Bardem portrayed one of the most villainous roles ever an actor ever has portrayed, and won for Best Supporting Actor. And then the two acting winners in both Marion Cotillard and Tilda Swinton are two performances I think are really terrific, but also from two actors who I really appreciate. Tilda Swinton has sort of been able to do weirder stuff with her careers and doing short films with automotive art because she's already won an Oscar. She doesn't really have to worry about that in that sense, and can sort of use that star power and has leveraged it really well throughout her career. But it's one of those situations where, is this Tilda Swinton's best performance? Yeah, maybe, but the truth is, I'm just really glad that Tilda Swinton has an Oscar. So this is a year where I think they got it right in almost all the big categories, and, a couple fun ones in the sense that, yes, Tilda Swinton, or Marion Cotillard, I'm really glad that these guys have actresses because they're so terrific and talented actors. So when deciding what movie to cover, I wasn't exactly sure which one, because truth be told, I think out of the 5 nominees, there isn't one that's really centrally forgotten. That usually every year there's one or two that have sort of fallen out of popular consciousness and I think fits within the show. But the truth is that I could have skipped this year like I did with 1975. Now, if you don't know, I've already done Forgotten Oscar Films Season 1, which looked at the years 1989 and worked backwards. So I actually skipped the year 1975 because the Best Picture nominees, none of them were forgotten. All of them were well remembered. This was the year of Jaws, of Barry Lyndon, of Dog Day Afternoon, of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and of Nashville. And Nashville could be sort of the odd man out, but really these are all well-acclaimed, critically acclaimed movies. So therefore I didn't do that year. But it was a little bit of a regret on my part because I really loved that year and I really just wanted to talk about it. So I decided not to actually skip 2007, even though I think Juno, Atonement, and Michael Clayton were very popular maybe at the time, but have sort of gone into their own weird different branches of popularity. However, ultimately I picked Michael Clayton because I enjoy it probably the most out of those three. I would probably still go with No Country for Old Men for the Best Picture winner, but Michael Clayton may have been the number 2. And this is kind of a weird year in terms of the Oscars, because very few times I think that the Oscars give the Best Picture to maybe the Best Picture, not in terms of my personal opinion, but in terms of the larger cultural impact. Like Parasite wasn't my favorite movie of the year. I loved the movie, but it did seem like the most sort of culturally relevant. It does seem like a movie that will stand the test of time, that's critically acclaimed, that's a real achievement. So that makes sense. I think that's the quote-unquote right Best Picture winner. But the Oscars don't necessarily always get that right. They miss on Goodfellas, they miss on Dark Knight, which I think should have won when we talked about on last week's episode. But what's even more rare is that either the 10 nominees, but more so in the past, the 5 nominees that got nominated were all movies that stood the test of time. I mean, this is a series built on going year by year and figuring out at least one Best Picture movie, which has sort of been forgotten to time, that they don't get it 5 out of 5 every year. As a matter of fact, it's very rare for them to get 5 out of 5. I think 75 was a year that they got all 5 were culturally relevant movies. 94 is another one, although there is a little bit of a glaring omission there. And 2007, in one part, is kind of like that, because I think all of the movies nominated are really solid and really great and do have a bit of that reputation still. But I've decided to talk about Michael Clayton, in part just because I think I like it out of the most that are sort of, I think, underrated. Even Juno or Atonement are a little bit, they have sort of strong followings, but they are still a little bit underrated. But particularly in Michael Clayton, I think, because of sort of its boring title and maybe poster, people have been less willing to watch it. But I think all the people that do watch it are really enamored by it, including myself. So transitioning now into my thoughts. I find this movie to be a symphony of intellect in every respect. It's a movie that is a complete story that you have to watch through to the very end to actually, I think, fully appreciate and understand it. Movies like Inside Llewyn Davis or Burning come to mind, where throughout the movie you're watching it, you're like, okay, this is interesting and I'm not exactly sure where it's going, but the writing's good, the performances are well done. But then when you see the final end of the movie, either if it's a twist or a reveal or just the sort of ultimate character arc, you see how everything was constructed, and it kind of leaves you on a cloud 9. But also I think it makes rewatches even more rewarding. I think this is a great rewatchable movie for that respect. So even though it's kind of been forgotten, it has been one that after I saw it, I have returned back to it. And I think that's central, because when you watch the movie, you realize that this is Michael Clayton's movie, that even though I think it's a little bit of a boring title, it is probably the apt title, because everything is viewed through his lens. We are really through him in every scene throughout the entire movie. The situation with you, North, and the law firm, it is seen as a problem through his eyes and the pressure that puts on him, his relationship with the bar and the loan sharks and his family life and his relationship with his brother, and how it is very much still a middle-age crisis kind of a movie where he's introspective and Michael is reflecting on his life and looking back on what, if it was worth it, did I lead the right life? These sort of questions come to mind too. And, you know, as he says in the movie, shit just keeps on falling on him. He's trying to answer that central question as to why this happened. What decisions did he make? Is it too late for him? So there's all these sort of actual plot mechanics that are coming down on him. You know, this is a big law case. This is the central part of the movie. But it is more than that, and it is stranger than that. And when you see the movie and you see his arc, you really see that the other stuff really doesn't matter, that it is still viewed at least through Michael Clayton and his kind of moral journey, I think, throughout the movie. And of course, this is all expressed and carried in many ways on the shoulders of George Clooney, the portrayer of Michael Clayton. And I think this is really a definitive kind of middle-age, kind of post Ocean's 11 Clooney, that in the middle part and the beginning part of his career, I think with, you know, From Dusk Till Dawn and Out of Sight and Ocean's 11, he was very like suave and cool, but now he's a little bit more grizzled, a little bit more self-reflective. And, you know, even though he has won an Oscar for Syriana before, this does seem like if it wasn't Daniel Day-Lewis's year, that this could have been his big Oscar year, because of how much it has to do with the internal reflection. So this is a character who has a lot of sort of, why does this keep happening to me, trying to understand his own life through his relationships. And that's easy to write down on a page, but it's even harder for an actor to put that forth and to make us understand why and to sympathize with his cause, even though he's, you know, at times a morally gray, ambiguous kind of a character, that Clooney still brings a little bit of charm and charisma and I think professionalism to his role, that you at least respect the character and want to be with him as he sort of goes through this journey, really. But I'd also be remiss not to talk about the supporting characters. Tom Wilkinson plays this incredibly kind of genius lawyer who's going off his meds and is starting to sort of jeopardize the case that they're working on, and it is manic at times and sort of a stream flow of anxiety, but other times when he's sort of focused and clear is incredibly intelligent, and Wilkinson is able to go back and forth that's really well and steals almost every scene he is in, because he's so much of a live wire. In an opposite situation, Tilda Swinton is the reserved version of that. She is so tight that you can only see a little bit of what's coming out. Even though so much stuff is happening to her, as they are with every other character, she's sort of trying to hold it in together. The movie really plays as well with sort of her look, in terms of, she's sort of a different kind of looking woman, and in this kind of a movie where Tilden sort of plays on her persona is a sense that of being kind of a corporate crony and sort of like a clone of somebody. But what she does, the little ticks and small things that she does, you don't really appreciate, I think, until the second or third times. I remember watching this movie and going, oh yeah, it's kind of weird that Tilda Swinton got the Oscar. Tom Wilkinson's a little bit more of a bigger performance. You'd think it would go to him. But when you watch it over and over, you realize how, like, oh no, this is actually a great Oscar that's aged very well, because it's so much fun seeing how she delivers lines, or how even when we open up in the movie and she's sort of sweating through her armpits. It's a strange performance, but she's so pitch perfect. And it's one of those performances where, yeah, she should have won, because I can't really imagine anyone else in that role either. Especially particularly how she sort of portrays it at the very end. My favorite scene is probably the ending right before the car ride, the sort of 3-minute long take, in which it is at first seemingly, I think, very triumphant, and every time I watch it, it's kind of like yes, this is awesome, this is great. And then how that leads into sort of the 3-minute shot of the car kind of reflects on more of the ambiguity of the movie. Did what Michael did, was that correct? Why did he do it? What were those motivations? Did he get to the correct outcome, maybe in nefarious means that maybe will hurt him in the long run? Where does he go from here? There is kind of like a reflection, kind of a Graduate or a Michael Mann-esque ending, where it's like, yes, this is what happened. I don't want to spoil the movie, but this is the climax of the movie. But then the final few minutes of the movie sort of reflect on, like, well, what's that going to do to this character? It's almost like a sequel could be made of, like, how is this going to really mess the events of this movie? How is it really going to mess and impact our character's internal persona? But the movie really as a whole relies on that incredible dialogue from Gilroy and that ambiguity of really making these three-dimensional characters played brilliantly by all, I think, the three main actors. But also, I'd be remiss to talk about someone like Sidney Pollack, who I think is just brilliant as Marty and totally fits that kind of a role. So there's so many different elements of the movie, and now transitioning, I think, into why this movie was forgotten. I think in part is because when people look at it, they just see George Clooney in a suit and it says Michael Clayton. Okay, so there's nothing enticing about necessarily the title, nothing enticing about the poster. If you watch the trailer, it's like a John Grisham-esque lawyer movie, which we've seen a bunch of those. But the truth is, it's not really that. I mean, it's not really a man against the system, dark waters, civil action kind of situation. It's much more morally gray. It's much more ambiguous in that sense. It's also much stranger. I mean, there's fantasy books in it, and the dialogue, and just the situations where he runs into Tom Wilkinson on the streets of New York and he's carrying like 12 baguettes. There is a bit of a mania, I think, to the movie that reflects kind of the internal state of these characters. That it is much stranger than sort of a traditional legal drama in that respect. So maybe the marketing didn't do so super well to give it a huge box office status. Then when you see the title card on Netflix, it's not immediately enticing. I think its Best Picture status also has sort of been forgotten to time, because so much of the 2007 Oscars, the big narrative was No Country for Old Men versus There Will Be Blood, and those two movies, like, which one do you like better? Particularly within the Oscar community, but also within from there on, I think Joel and Ethan Coen and Paul Thomas Anderson are the two big directors from this year. So people kind of forget about, Tony Gilroy, who has made it almost an equally as good movie as them. And then, of course, this is in a year where movies like Zodiac or Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford were less appreciated. So now, because they weren't appreciated then, they start to become more appreciated within the online community and become more of a cult type movies. So there is sort of a situation there where, because Michael Clayton was recognized at the time, actually, it gets sort of tossed to the side, and then people kind of forget and just think it's a generic George Clooney law movie, which definitely is not. But the truth is ultimately that it's an underrated movie, because I just don't think a lot of people necessarily celebrate it as much, and not maybe as many people have seen it as I would like necessarily. But I do think the people that do see the movie, that people that have seen the movie, really appreciate it, really like it, and that's cool by me. Sort of this little hive of Michael Clayton stands. I'm happy to be a part of it. I'm happy to hopefully express my thoughts in the context here of the 2007 Oscars. So please let me know in the comments down below your favorite movie from 2007. Maybe it was Superbad, or Ratatouille that didn't even get nominated, or maybe it's one of these, would you go with Michael Clayton? Would you go for No Country for Old Men? Do you think this is an underrated movie? Please, all that kind of stuff I'd love to hear in the comments down below. That's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, stay tuned.